The family meeting called to deal with what Iris has been doing. My Uncle Teodoro, 81 years old, who had taught me to fish, who had given me away at my wedding, stood up with his hands shaking and said, "I give you $9,000, Mija. My savings. You asked me for it from your own account in your own words, and I gave it to you because I love you. Just tell me why." 20 relatives watched me, and I said, "Tio, I never asked you for $1 in my life." In about 10 minutes, I'm going to prove to everyone in this room exactly who did. Let me back up, because to understand how I ended up standing in front of my entire family accused of robbing an 81-year-old man who loved me, I have to understand that the person who robbed him was wearing my face, and that for 2 years, every single piece of evidence in the world pointed at me because that was the entire design. My name is Iris Delgado. I'm 34 years old, and for 2 years, my older sister impersonated me online, my name, my photos, my voice, my whole identity, to systematically scam our own relatives out of money. And when it collapsed, she told the family it had been me all along. This is the story of what it's like to be framed with your own face, and how I finally proved that the woman who'd been robbing our family for 2 years was the one who'd been standing beside me the whole time, weeping about how betrayed she felt. Let me tell you about my sister first, because the mechanics of this only make sense if you understand her. Camilla is 3 years older than me, and Camilla has, for as long as I can remember, been a person who takes, not violently, charmingly. She has never in her life had money she didn't need to borrow, never had a job she kept, never had a crisis that wasn't someone else's to solve. She has always been better liked than me, because she's warm and funny and self-deprecating, and enormously good at making people feel special, while I am the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who's fine. That difference is the whole reason the scheme worked. Because when Camilla needed a mask to rob our family, she didn't pick a stranger's face. She picked mine, the trustworthy one. Nobody would send money to Camilla. Everyone in that family had learned over decades that money given to Camilla was money gone. But Iris was reliable. Iris paid people back. Iris had never asked anyone for anything in her life. My decades of being the boring, responsible sister had built something Camilla needed and couldn't build herself: credibility. So she took it. She wore my reputation like a coat. Here's how she did it, and it was patient and it was ugly. She built accounts. Not one, several over time across different platforms. Using my name, my photographs, lifted from my real accounts and from family shares, details of my life she knew intimately because she'd lived it beside me. She could write like me because she'd known me for 34 years. She knew our family's history, our private references, the texture of how I actually talked to our relatives. The accounts were flawless, because who could impersonate you better than the sister who grew up in your bedroom? And then she went to work on the family, carefully. She contacted a relative, as me, and rebuilt a warm connection first. No ask, just conversation, sometimes for weeks. And then, eventually, the emergency. Always private, always urgent, always with a reason not to mention it to anyone else. "I'm embarrassed. Please don't tell Mom. I'll pay you back next month. I'd only ask you." She hit them one at a time in isolation, and she chose her marks by vulnerability. Our Uncle Teodoro, 81, half-deaf, generous, and this matters not sophisticated about the internet, who loved me like his own daughter. Our Aunt Perpetua, 2 older cousins, family friends. For 2 years, Camilla, as me, extracted somewhere in the region of $40,000 from people who loved me. And here is the design's genius, the thing that made it so nearly perfect. Every victim thought they were the only one, because she told each of them not to tell anyone. So no one ever compared notes. And the me who was asking always had a reason for the secrecy that made sense: embarrassment, pride, not wanting to worry the family, which is exactly what a real person in trouble would say. Let me tell you about the day it collapsed, because it collapsed the way these always do, by accident. 2 victims talked. Our Aunt Perpetua mentioned to Teodoro in passing something about helping Iris out, and Teodoro said, "You too." And within an hour, the family was on the phone with each other, and within a day they had assembled a picture. Iris had been quietly borrowing money from half the family, for 2 years, tens of thousands of dollars, always in secret, always, with a promise to repay that never came. And the family's conclusion was instant and unanimous: Iris is a con artist. I found out when my mother called me, and she wasn't crying, she was cold, which was worse, and she said, "How much did you take from Tio Teodoro?" And I said, "What?" And she said, Don't you dare. He's 81, Iris. He's showing me the messages from your account, with your face on it, in your words." And I said, over and over like an idiot, it wasn't me, I never." And I could hear, on the other end, my own mother deciding she didn't believe me. Let me describe what the next months were like, because I want anyone who's ever been disbelieved to know I understand. The evidence was overwhelming, and all of it pointed at me. That's what a good frame is. There were messages from accounts with my name and my face. There were details in those messages only I would know, except they were details Camilla also knew, because she was my sister. There were 20 family members with the same story. Iris asked me for money privately and never paid it back. What was my defense? That wasn't me. Against a mountain, I sounded exactly like a caught thief, and the family convicted me in about a week. Aunt stopped speaking to me, cousins blocked me. My mother, my own mother, told me I had become someone she didn't recognize. I was disinvited from Christmas. 34 years of being the responsible one, the reliable one, evaporated instantly, because a mountain of evidence beats a lifetime of character always. People I'd known my whole life looked at me like a stranger who'd been wearing a costume, which is exactly, precisely backwards, and the irony of that nearly killed me. Let me tell you about the single worst hour, because it's the one that taught me what I was actually up against. About 3 weeks in, I asked for a meeting. Just my mother, my Aunt Perpetua, and me. brought everything I could think of. My bank statements, printed, showing no deposits. My real account, open on my phone, showing my actual message history. I had this idea, this pathetic, hopeful idea, that if I could just sit across from them and show them the facts, they'd see it. I set my bank statements on the table. My mother didn't touch them. I said, "Mama, look, this is every account I have." $40,000 supposedly came to me. Show me where it is. It isn't here. It was never here. And my Aunt Perpetua, who I'd known my entire life, who taught me to make tamales, looked at the statements for about 4 seconds and said, "So you moved it. Obviously you moved it. You're not going to leave stolen money sitting in your checking account, Iris. You're smarter than that." And that's when I understood. There was no evidence I could produce that couldn't be absorbed into the story. My bank records showing nothing, I'd hidden it. My real account looking normal, I'd used a different one which was true, except someone else had. Denials, exactly what a thief would say, my distress. Guilt, my calm, coldness. Every single thing I did, including the things an innocent person would do, was readable as proof of guilt, because they had already decided. And once people decide, evidence stops being evidence and becomes material to be interpreted. I said, "What could I possibly show you that would change your mind?" And my mother looked at me, and I'll remember this until I die, and said, "You could tell the truth, Iris. That's all any of us want." I was telling the truth. I had been telling the truth for 3 weeks, and the truth was the one thing that had no standing in that room. And I realized, sitting there with my useless bank statements, that I wasn't in a disagreement about facts. I was in a story, and I'd been cast, and there's no argument that gets you out of a story people have already decided to believe. I drove home, and I didn't cry. I sat in the driveway for a long time, and I thought, they're never going to take my word for it. Not ever. Whatever fixes this, it will not be me saying so. That was the most useful hour of the whole 2 years, though it didn't feel like it. Because it killed my last hope of being believed and forced me toward the only thing that would ever work, something that didn't require my word at all. And Camilla. Camilla was magnificent. She was so supportive. She called me every day. She told me she believed me. She was the only one who said it, and she went to the family and defended me in ways that made everything worse. I know she's got problems with money, but I don't think she meant to hurt anyone. She played the loyal sister standing by her disgraced sibling. She was, in her own way, the greatest performance of her life. She'd robbed our family with my face and then held my hand at the funeral of my reputation. Let me tell you about Teodoro, because he's the reason I couldn't just walk away. My uncle Teodoro gave that woman $9,000. He was 81. It was, functionally, his savings, the cushion between him and disaster. He gave it because he thought his niece needed help, and he never told anyone because she'd asked him not to, and because he was proud to be the one she came to. And when it came out, Teodoro didn't rage at me. That's what destroyed me. He just looked so bewildered and so hurt, and he kept saying, "I don't understand. I don't understand why she'd do that to me." An old man who taught me to fish, who gave me away at my wedding, sitting there with his savings gone and his heart broken, unable to understand why the girl he loved had robbed him. That's what she did, not just the money. She made an 81-year-old man believe that a person he'd loved his whole life had looked at his savings and taken them. I could not let that stand, whatever it cost. Let me tell you about the midpoint, the moment I nearly ended it the wrong way because I came very close. About 4 months in, drowning, exiled, unable to convince anyone of anything, I decided to pay it back. All of it. $40,000 I'd never taken, money I'd never seen, out of my own savings, the actual savings of the actual responsible sister, to make it stop. Not because I was guilty. Because being disbelieved was so unbearable that buying my way out of it started to look like relief. I thought, if I just pay everyone back, they'll forgive me, and we can pretend it never happened, and I can have my family again. I got as far as sitting down with my laptop to start transferring money to Teodoro. And then I thought about what it would mean. Paying back money I never took is a confession. It's the loudest possible confession. It would freeze the lie into permanent truth. Iris did it, and Iris made it right, and we don't talk about it. I would spend the rest of my life as the family's forgiven thief. My mother would look at me with sad grace forever. And Camilla would be free. She'd have robbed the family, watched her sister take the blame, and collected $40,000 in restitution paid by her own victim. She'd get away with it completely, and she'd get away with it because I financed her escape. I closed the laptop, and I got angry, really angry, for the first time, the clean, useful kind. Because I finally understood that she hadn't just stolen from the family. She'd stolen my name, and if I paid, I'd be signing it over to her permanently. So I stopped trying to convince people, and I started building a case. Here's what I understood. I could not win an argument about character. Camilla had spent 34 years being more likable than me, and she built a mountain of evidence, and my word against the mountain was nothing. But the mountain was made of digital artifacts, and digital artifacts have properties that stories don't. They have timestamps. They have origins. They have metadata. She built her whole scheme out of the one material that doesn't lie about where it came from. Let me tell you about my cousin Rafa, the subplot who made it possible. Rafa is 26, works in it, and was the only person in the family who hadn't fully convicted me, not out of loyalty, but out of professional skepticism. He called me about 5 months in and said something no one else had said. "Iris, I keep looking at these messages everyone's showing around. Can I ask you something weird? Do you have your actual accounts? Like the real ones you actually use?" I said yes. And Rafa said, "Then here's what's bothering me. The account that messaged Teodoro isn't the account you've had since 2014. It's a different account. It's newer. It's got your name and your photos, but it isn't yours. Nobody's checked because everyone just saw your face and stopped looking. Iris, I don't think anybody in this family has actually looked at these accounts. They just looked at the pictures. That was the first moment in 5 months that I could breathe. And then Rafa said the thing that turned everything. If those accounts aren't yours, then somebody made them. And everything anybody makes online leaves a trail. Where it was created. What device? What network? When? Victims have the messages. That's what they've been passing around, but nobody's asked the real question. Not what the messages say, where they came from. Let me tell you what we found, carefully and properly, because this part matters. I want to be clear about the process, because it wasn't vigilante hacking. I filed a police report as a victim of identity theft, which is exactly what I was. Someone had created accounts in my name and used them to defraud people. That's a crime committed against me as much as against my relatives. And with a report filed and a case opened, the process has teeth that individuals don't. Platforms respond to legal requests. Financial institutions respond. The question, where did this money actually go, has an answer that a bank can produce. And the answers came back and they were total. The money didn't go to me. That was the first and simplest fact, and it was devastating in its clarity. $40,000 had been sent by my relatives to accounts that were not mine, that had never been mine, that I had no access to and no connection with. The funds traced to Camilla. Every dollar, my bank records, which I turned over voluntarily and completely, showed no corresponding deposits ever of any of it. The accounts were created on a device that wasn't mine, on a network that wasn't mine. And the timeline was the kill shot. Because Rafa had asked the right question, and the right question produced a set of specific timestamps, exactly when each fraudulent message was sent. And several of those timestamps were, for me, provably impossible. I was on a plane. I was in a hospital waiting room with 12 witnesses. I was, on one memorable occasion, at Camilla's own house at a family dinner, in a room full of relatives, at the exact minute. I was messaging Teodoro asking for $4,000. The frame had been built on the assumption that nobody would ever check the when and where. She'd made a mountain of what the messages said, what my face looked like on the profile, and counted on the family's outrage to stop them from ever asking the two questions that would end her. Let me tell you about the meeting. The family called it formally to deal with what Iris has been doing. A reckoning, possibly a demand for restitution, possibly an expulsion. 20 relatives, my mother, Teodoro, and Camilla sitting near the front wearing her supportive sister face. Teodoro stood up first, hands shaking, and said the thing that had been breaking my heart for 8 months. I gave you $9,000, Mija, my savings. You asked me from your own account in your own words, and I gave it because I love you. Just tell me why. And I said, Teo, I never asked you for $1 in my life, and in about 10 minutes, I'm going to prove to everyone in this room exactly who did. I laid it out. Everyone in this room has been looking at messages with my name and my photo and stopped there. Nobody asked the two questions that matter. Not what the messages say, where they came from, and where the money went. I started with the money. $40,000 left this family. It never arrived in any account of mine. Here are my complete bank records for the entire 2-year period. I've turned them over voluntarily in full. Not $1 of the money any of you sent is in them. Not one. So if I'm the thief, where's the money? I let that sit. Then, I filed a police report as a victim of identity theft because someone created accounts in my name and used them to defraud my own family. That report opened a process. And that process asked the bank where the money actually went. I looked at my sister. It went at Camilla, every dollar, all 40,000. The room did not react at first. It was too big. And Camilla started to laugh, an incredulous, wounded laugh, the beginning of the greatest performance of her life, and said, Iris, what are you asterisk doing? And the accounts, I said, were made on a device that isn't mine, on a network that isn't mine. And here's the part I want Teodoro to hear especially. I turned to my uncle. The message asking you for $4,000, the one you showed everyone, the one with my face on it, was sent at 8:42 on a Thursday evening in March. Teo, do you remember where I was that night? He looked at me blank. I was at Camilla's house, at her dinner table, in a room with 14 people including you. You sat across from me. You told me about your knee. I put the timestamp on the table next to the photo someone had posted from that dinner, timestamped 8:40. I was in a photograph 2 minutes before I asked you for $4,000. My phone was on the table. 14 people watched me eat dinner. So who was messaging you, Teo? Because it wasn't the woman sitting across from you. The silence that followed is the loudest thing I have ever heard. And then Rafa stood up. I checked all of it, he said to the room. The accounts that contacted every one of you aren't Iris's accounts. They were created 2 years ago on a device that isn't hers. Iris's real account, the one she's had since 2014, is a different account entirely. Nobody in this family ever looked. You all just saw her face and decided. Everyone turned to Camilla. Here's how it ended. Camilla did what she'd done her whole life. She performed. Tears, incredulity, a wounded riff about how her sister was so damaged that she was now accusing her own family. And for about 90 seconds, it almost worked because it always had. And then Teodoro, 81, half-deaf, gentle Teodoro, said, quietly, without getting up, Camilla, look at me and say you didn't take my money. And she couldn't do it. She looked at the old man she'd robbed of $9,000 using her sister's face, and her mouth opened, and nothing came out, and everyone in that room watched a 37-year-old woman fail to lie to her uncle. That was the end. Legal process ran its course, and I'm not going to detail it, because it's my family's private grief, and because the specifics belong to the people who live them. But identity theft and defrauding elderly relatives are serious crimes, and my sister faced real consequences. Some money was recovered. Most wasn't, because there was nothing left of it. $40,000 had gone the way everything Camilla has ever touched is gone. I paid Teodoro back myself. His 9,000 out of my own money after I was cleared, not before, which is the entire difference. Before, it would have been a confession. After, it was just a niece taking care of her uncle. He fought me on it for a month. I told him it was the only thing I'd asked of him in 34 years and he'd have to let me. He cried. I cried. He calls me every Sunday now, and last summer he took me fishing, and neither of us mentions the money, and I'd pay it 10 times over for that. My mother's the wound that hasn't closed. She apologized genuinely, at length, more than once. But she convicted me in a week. 34 years of being her reliable daughter, and it took her 7 days to decide I'd robbed an old man, and no apology fully undoes that. We're okay. We talk. But something in me measures her now, and I don't think it will ever stop. Rafa is family in the way that matters. He was 26, and he was the only person in 20 who asked a question instead of joining a verdict. And he did it for the least sentimental and most valuable reason. Because the evidence didn't smell right, and he had the skills to say so. He gave me 8 words that ended 2 years. Nobody looked. They just saw your face. And I will be grateful to him for the rest of my life. Camilla and I do not speak and won't. Not out of rage, out of arithmetic. She wore my face to rob an old man and then held my hand while the family destroyed me. There's no relationship on the far side of that. She's writ to me twice. I didn't open either one. For 2 years, my sister wore my name to rob the people who loved me, and then let them convict me for it. She built a mountain of evidence, and it was overwhelming, and every single piece of it pointed at me because she'd made it out of me. My name, my face, my words, my 34 years of being the sister nobody had a reason to doubt. She robbed our family with my reputation and left me holding the receipt, and it nearly worked. Because when there's a mountain, nobody climbs it. They just look at it and decide. But she made one mistake, and it's the mistake every impersonator makes, and it's the reason I'm not still the family's thief. She was so busy building what the messages said that she forgot the 2 questions that don't care what anything says. Where did it come from, and where did the money go? Not $1 was ever in my account. Not one message came from my device. And at 8:42 on a Thursday in March, while my face was asking my uncle for $4,000, I was sitting at my sister's own dinner table with 14 witnesses and a photograph. She could copy my name, my face, my history, my voice. She could copy everything about me that a person can see. She just couldn't be in 2 places at once. And it turned out that was the only thing she needed to be.